Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
This happened a few years back when my wife and I had just welcomed our second child. We were living in this tiny apartment that was way too cramped for our growing family, so we decided to move into this duplex we found in what seemed like an amazing neighborhood. It even had its own little playground for the kids, which we thought was perfect. I work as a maintenance supervisor at a local factory, and my wife is a part-time nurse. With two young kids and demanding jobs, we really needed a peaceful place to call home. The duplex seemed like the answer to our prayers. We spent the entire weekend moving our stuff in, and I made sure to introduce myself to all the neighbors. Most of them were younger folks, but they seemed friendly enough. There was this older guy next door who repaired bikes as a hobby, and another neighbor who did woodworking. Both of them were really welcoming and even offered to help us settle in. But then came our first real taste of what we were dealing with upstairs. The very next day after we moved in, I was getting ready for work when I heard someone knocking on our door. I opened it, and there was this little 7-year-old kid standing there with a bag of goldfish crackers and a crumpled note. The note basically said they had to go out and asked if we could watch their son. It was a Tuesday morning, and this kid should have been in school. When I asked him where his parents went, he just shrugged and said he didn't know. He told me they said they'd be back later. I asked if he was supposed to be in school, and he said yes, but his parents told him he could stay home. That was my first red flag. I brought the kid inside, gave him some proper breakfast, and called Child Protective Services, who just dumps their kid on strangers they've never even met. My wife came downstairs and was shocked to see the little boy. I explained that our upstairs neighbors apparently thought we were a free babysitting service. The older guy next door came over later that evening when he saw all the commotion. He told me I'd already met my upstairs neighbors and wasn't surprised when I explained what happened. He said they were trouble, with constant parties, and people coming and going at all hours. He mentioned that neighbors had been trying to get the landlord to do something about them for months. The woodworking neighbor agreed that those two were bad news. He said the guy always had sketchy people coming around, and the woman he lived with was just as bad. He mentioned they had another woman living there too, and none of them seemed to care about that poor kid. Starting that very night, it was like living underneath a nightclub. Music blasting until 3 in the morning, people stomping around, shouting, doors slamming. My wife was trying to recover from childbirth, our newborn couldn't sleep, and our toddler was constantly waking up scared. I tried the diplomatic approach first. I went upstairs and knocked on their door. When the guy answered, I introduced myself as his downstairs neighbor and asked if he could keep the noise down a bit because we had two young kids. He rudely told me this was his place and he could do whatever he wanted. I tried to explain that it was pretty loud, especially late at night, but he just told me to mind my own business. Karen jumped in and asked if I was seriously complaining about them living their lives, pointing out that they paid rent too. I was just asking for some consideration, maybe keeping it down after 10 or 11, but the guy told me to get lost. That conversation went nowhere fast. The noise actually got worse after that, like they were doing it on purpose. I called the landlord multiple times, but he was completely useless. He said when they paid rent, there wasn't much he could do and suggested I try talking to them again. I told him I'd already tried talking to them and they didn't care. But he said he didn't want to get involved in tenant disputes. This went on for weeks. Every single night was the same thing. My wife was exhausted, the kids were cranky, and I was running on maybe 3 hours of sleep. It was affecting my work, my family, everything. Then one night, things escalated big time. They were having another party and it was particularly loud. I went upstairs again, this time more frustrated. I told them this had to stop because my wife just had a baby and none of us could sleep. Karen snapped back that it wasn't their problem and that I chose to have kids. I was asking them nicely to show some basic respect, but the guy threatened to make me get lost if I didn't leave on my own. When I asked if he was threatening me, he told me to take it however I wanted. That's when it turned into a full shouting match. Other neighbors came out to see what was happening. It was embarrassing and frustrating but I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. But then I started noticing other things. That poor kid upstairs was being left alone constantly. I'd see him sitting on the front steps by himself, sometimes for hours. He was always wearing the same dirty clothes, and he looked so thin. My wife and I started making extra food and bringing it to him whenever we saw him outside alone. When we'd ask if he was hungry, he'd say yes and explain that his mom and dad forgot to leave him food again. We'd tell him we made too much dinner and invite him to eat with us. The kid's face would just light up. It broke our hearts. Here we were dealing with noise complaints, while this little boy was being neglected right above us. I called Child Protective Services again, and then again. They came out a few times, but somehow, the parents always managed to be home during those visits. Then one night, everything changed. I heard them come home around 2 in the morning, but something was different. I looked out the window and saw their red car was completely smashed up. The front end was destroyed, and there was damage all along the side. It was obvious they'd been in an accident, probably a hit and run. I didn't hesitate. I called the police immediately and reported a possible hit and run, explaining that my upstairs neighbors just came home with a heavily damaged vehicle. The police showed up about 20 minutes later, and that's when things got really interesting. They ran the license plate and found out the guy had an outstanding warrant for drug trafficking. I watched from my window when they put him in handcuffs and led him away. Karen was screaming and carrying on, and the other woman was trying to calm her down. But I wasn't done. I was tired of dealing with these people, and that poor kid deserved better. My wife decided to do some digging. She told me she found the mom on social media and showed me the woman's profile. We started looking into public records and discovered they owed a furniture rental company nearly $48,000. Apparently, they'd skipped out on their previous place and taken all the rented furniture with them. I told my wife this was interesting information and asked if we should do something about it. She agreed that the kid deserved better than this and that these people were criminals. So I made another call, this time to the rental company. I explained the situation and gave them the address. Within 48 hours, there was a sheriff's deputy at the door with a big truck. I watched from my window when they emptied out the entire upstairs apartment. The beds, couches, that annoying sound system that kept us up all night, kitchen table, dressers, everything went into that truck. Karen came running out screaming that they couldn't take her stuff and that she needed it. The sheriff explained that the furniture belonged to the rental company and that she was in violation of her rental agreement. She yelled that this was theft and threatened to call the police. The deputy told her he was the police and warned that if she didn't calm down, she'd be under arrest. But Karen didn't calm down. She actually took a swing at the deputy and got herself arrested for assaulting an officer. The second woman was standing there holding the little boy, and I could see she was crying. Child Protective Services showed up right after the sheriff's truck left. That was hard to watch. I knew it was the right thing to do, but seeing that little boy get taken away still hurt. He looked so confused and scared. But here's the thing, it gets better. When they took the furniture, they found the guy's drug stash hidden in one of the dressers. Since he was out on bail, that meant he was going right back to jail. So in the end, the drug dealer went to prison, Karen got arrested for assaulting a police officer, and their apartment got completely cleaned out. The second woman actually approached me a few weeks later. She said she knew I was the one who called about everything. I started to apologize and explain my reasoning, but she stopped me and said I shouldn't apologize. She told me I did the right thing and admitted she was too scared to leave and too messed up to see what was happening to her boy. She told me she was going into rehab and working with social services to get her son back. She actually thanked me for forcing her to face reality. A couple of years later, I ran into her at the grocery store. She looked completely different, healthy, clean, working at the deli counter. She recognized me and asked if I remembered her. I said of course and asked how she was doing. She told me she got her son back 6 months ago, was clean, had her own place, and was working full-time. She wanted to thank me again for what I did and said I probably saved both their lives. That made everything worth it. So I run a small skateboard company. Nothing huge, but I make decent boards and I've been trying to get them into more shops. It's tough work, especially when you're competing with the big brands that everyone knows. I've been skating for about 15 years now. Started when I was 12 and never really stopped. A few years back, I decided to turn my passion into a business. I design my own boards, work with manufacturers, and handle all the business side of things. It's been a struggle, but I love what I do. The hardest part is getting shops to actually carry my boards when they've got limited space and the big companies dominating the market. Yesterday was National Go Skate Day, so skate parks all over the country were hosting competitions. I saw this as a perfect opportunity to visit a shop I've been trying to work with for months. They were hosting a contest at a local park, and I figured I could finally meet them in person and show them my boards. The park they chose has a reputation for having some of the worst skaters around. Not skill-wise, but attitude-wise. These guys are absolute jerks who cut each other off, start fights, and make the whole experience miserable for everyone else. I normally wouldn't step foot in that place, but business is business. I arrived early hoping it wouldn't be too crowded yet. The place was already packed with aggressive skaters looking for trouble. Within the first hour, I had collisions with 4 different people. Maybe some were my fault. Maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but the tension was already high. I decided to head to the pool section since it's one of the few spots where only one person can skate at a time. I dropped in and started skating in circles, just trying to get a feel for the bowl and warm up. I'd only been in there for maybe 2 minutes when this kid started yelling at me from the top. The kid screamed that I needed to get out of the pool because I was trash and the park was only for good skaters. He said he needed to warm up so he could win the contest that the shop was hosting. He kept calling me names and saying I clearly couldn't do any tricks and had no shot at winning. I tried to ignore him, but he kept going. I knew it was still my turn in the pool, so I kept skating. When I finally popped out of the bowl right next to him, he actually pushed me. He told me it was locals only and warned me not to let him see me step on my board again in his park. I just told him whatever and said I'd leave him to it. I was about to put my board away when an idea hit me. Everyone thinks skate companies will sponsor anyone who can do a kickflip, so I decided to have some fun and let word spread around the park that I was there scouting talent for my team. I started cheering for different skaters doing their basic tricks. I called them over one by one and told them I was looking for new riders. Within half an hour, kids all over the park were introducing themselves to me, asking what company I represented, what the sponsorship requirements were, the whole deal. Even if my plan didn't work out, I was creating serious buzz for my company. Sure enough, the kid who pushed me earlier came over to talk. He apologized for yelling at me earlier and said he didn't mean it, claiming he was just excited. I told him I understood and that I was going to give him another chance. I asked if he was competing and he said yeah, he was there to destroy all the losers. I said I'd seen him skating around while I was talking to people and that he was really good, exactly the level we needed for our team. I told him I planned on keeping an eye on him and asked him not to disappoint me. When I asked his name, he said it was Kyle and got all excited saying he had it on lock. I have to give him credit, Kyle actually was a talented skater. I had no plans of actually sponsoring him or anyone else, but the kid had skills. When the contest started, I made sure to film Kyle closely. The first event was best trick on the A-frame ramp. There was no coordination about who went when. The shop guys just told everyone to go and called out tricks they saw through their megaphone. Kyle skated the contest exactly like the jerk he'd been earlier. He yelled at people, pushed them out of the way, and even hit someone with his board. I caught every single confrontation on video. Kyle ended up placing third with a big flip over the A-frame. That's a kickflip combined with a 360-degree board rotation and a 180-degree body rotation. It's actually pretty impressive. Somehow he got beat by a kid who did a simple tail slide and someone who did a kickflip into a board slide. I went up to Kyle and complimented his big flip trick, saying it was hard, and I was impressed. I asked if he had anything special planned for the next contest. Kyle got annoyed and called me an idiot, explaining that it was called a game of letters and was like horse but for skateboarding. He said hell yeah. He had something planned. I told him I knew what it was and said I was excited to see what he could do, even though I was getting irritated by his attitude. The letter game started with a single elimination bracket. I kept filming everything Kyle did. Every time his opponent missed a trick, he made fun of them. Every time they went to attempt a trick, he yelled something to throw off their concentration. When he landed tricks, he celebrated like he'd won the Olympics. When he missed, he blamed his opponent and pushed them. He got knocked out in the third round. Kyle threw his board across the park, nearly hitting someone, and walked off. When he came back, I played it cool. I congratulated him on getting to the third round and said I really liked some of his tricks. I told him I'd gotten a lot of them on camera and would edit all the footage from the day to show him later. Kyle complained that the jerk who beat him had cheated and that everyone knew you weren't allowed to do body rotations. I told him to get revenge in the next event, and he bragged that he had the race on lockdown. The next event was a simple race around the park, best time wins. Kyle wasn't even close to being competitive. He was slow, wasn't hitting obstacles correctly, and all the pressure I was putting on him seemed to be getting to his head. He shoved people out of the way to go early, then had to watch 15 people crush his time. Every time someone looked like they might beat his time, he started yelling and screaming at them. He even threw sand on the course, probably hoping people would slip on it. I made an excuse for him, saying it looked like he needed new bearings because he kept losing speed, but his form was great. Kyle agreed and started complaining about his mom calling her names and saying she wouldn't replace his garbage bearings. I told him I had to grab something real quick for a company emergency and asked if he'd be there when I got back in an hour. He said of course he would. I left and spent the time going through all the video footage of Kyle. I made an edit of every time he screamed at someone, cheated, or showed poor sportsmanship. There was about 10 minutes of him being a complete jerk, all edited into one highlight reel. I also grabbed lunch because I was starving. When I got back to the park, I grabbed a brand new deck from my car. When I walked in, I waved Kyle over. All the events had finished, and the shop owners were just socializing with skaters. Kyle got super excited when he saw the board, asking if it was for him and if he got the spot on the team. I told him to come check out a video and said I wanted to show him exactly what I was paying attention to the entire time he was skating. I showed Kyle the video. It opened with his big flip trick, then proceeded to show him being a complete jerk for 10 straight minutes. He made excuses throughout the whole thing, saying he didn't mean it, it was a mistake. Typical loser stuff. I explained that I loved how he skated, but I expected better behavior from any rider who might represent my company. I told him if he went and found all the skaters he'd been mean to and made up with them before I left, we might have a spot on the team for him. Kyle said those losers admired him and they'd all be excited to see him on my team. I told him that when he made up with them, he should tell them to come see me because I wanted to hear from them that they were cool with him. I went to hang out with the shop owners while Kyle supposedly made his apologies. I pointed out everyone at the contest riding one of my boards and explained how they should carry my decks since their audience was already skating them. After a few minutes, Kyle came up holding a little kid by his ear. Kyle threatened the kid, telling him to say they were cool right now or he'd rip his ear off. The poor kid quickly agreed and said they were cool. I waved the kid off and he ran away, but now I was watching Kyle bully all these kids into coming over and saying they were cool with him. The shop owners asked what it was about, and I explained how I'd said we couldn't sponsor anyone who behaved that way. They agreed it was ridiculous, and we just watched Kyle get worse and worse. Finally, one of the bigger kids refused the forced apology, and a fight broke out. I rushed over to break it up, but Kyle had already gotten his face beaten in. The other kid was yelling about how nobody liked Kyle and how he would never tell anyone to sponsor him for any reason. Kyle came up to me crying and sniffling, claiming he'd tried to apologize, and the other kid beat him up. He insisted he hadn't done anything wrong. I told him not to worry because I'd seen the whole thing, and so had the guys at the shop. I said we knew exactly what happened. That's when I heard sirens in the background. I didn't think much of it until police officers rushed past me and started restraining people. The police officer asked what happened and told everyone to speak one at a time. Kyle lied and said he was just skating, minding his own business, when the other guy beat him up. He claimed he didn't do anything to deserve it. The other kid told the truth, explaining that Kyle had come over shoving everyone around and telling them they had to apologize for cheating in the contest and go tell me they were cool so he could get sponsored. They went back and forth until the police finally came to me. The officer asked if it was true that I'd told Kyle I'd sponsor him if he made up with everybody there. I told them I had a video they needed to see. I showed the police footage of Kyle pushing people and yelling at everyone all day. I explained how the other kid had just decided he'd had enough and fought back to protect himself. They walked Kyle out in handcuffs, and I didn't even need to tell him he didn't get the sponsorship. The police checked with everybody who had come to tell me they were cool with Kyle to make sure he hadn't hurt them too badly. They also checked with people from the video and collected everyone's contact information. They started asking people over 18 if they wanted to press charges, and called parents of younger kids to ask the same thing. A few people let it go, but at least 10 people wanted to press charges against Kyle. The police asked for my video and all the raw footage, so I emailed everything to them. One officer spent a painful amount of time recording my phone with his body camera while the video played. Took about an hour before I got my phone back. By then the shop had packed up and was heading out, promising once again to respond to my email about whether they wanted to buy my boards. I won't bother keeping up with what happens to Kyle, but I'm sure he'll be facing some serious trouble for that fight and all the assault charges. The kid who beat him up seemed to be in trouble too, but at least he was defending himself and others. Kyle was 17 or 18, by the way, not some little kid. I used to work as a product manager at this small manufacturing company. I just moved up from being a technical guy who spent his days buried in spreadsheets and databases. The company wasn't huge, maybe 50 employees total, but we made decent money selling industrial parts to bigger companies. Every year around budget time, I had to create sales forecasts. This was back in the early 90s when everything was done on those old green-striped computer paper printouts. If you wanted to analyze data, you had to manually type everything into Lotus 123 spreadsheets. No fancy software, no automated imports, just me and a calculator spending hours entering numbers. The sales forecasts weren't just busy work either. Manufacturing used them to figure out how many workers to hire and how much raw material to order. Get it wrong, and we'd either have people sitting around with nothing to do or customers waiting months for their orders. So I spent 3 weeks going through 4 years of sales records, typing everything into my spreadsheet. Product by product, month by month, sale by sale. My fingers were cramped and my eyes were burning by the time I finished. Looking at the data, something interesting jumped out. Our sales were completely flat throughout the year. No summer rush, no winter slowdown, just steady numbers month after month. Sometimes a big customer would place a huge order and we'd see a spike, but otherwise, everything averaged out to the same monthly total. I combined the historical data with a company's target of 5% growth for next year and sent my forecast to my manager. The numbers showed steady growth spread evenly across 12 months. 2 days later, he called me into his office. He complained that there was no cycling in my forecast. I explained that our sales didn't cycle because they stayed flat year-round. He insisted that there had to be cycles because every business has seasonal patterns. I told him I checked the data 3 times and our sales stayed consistent throughout the year. He shot back that he'd been in business for 20 years and there are always cycles. I should know that there are busy seasons and slow seasons because that's just how business works. I tried to show him the historical data, but he said he didn't care what the numbers showed. He knew how business worked and there are always seasonal variations. When I asked him which months should be higher or lower, he told me to figure it out since I was the product manager. I stared at him for a moment, trying to understand what he was asking. I asked if he wanted me to create fake seasonal patterns that didn't exist in our actual sales history. He said he wanted a realistic forecast that showed proper business cycles. I asked him what I should base these cycles on. He said common sense, because every industry has peak times and down times. I could see there was no point arguing. He'd made up his mind that reality was wrong and I needed to fix it. I told him I'd revise the forecast. He said good and reminded me to make it look professional since we were presenting it to the board next week. I went back to my desk and opened up Lotus 123. If he wanted fake cycles, I'd give him fake cycles. I created each monthly total and inserted the random number function. Then I set up the spreadsheet so I could hit refresh and watch the numbers change randomly. I spent the next hour hitting refresh over and over until I got a pattern that looked like seasonal variation, some months higher, some lower, but still hitting our annual target of 5% growth. The whole thing was completely artificial, generated by a computer function that created random numbers. I printed it out and walked back to my manager's office. I handed him the revised forecast with seasonal cycling. He looked it over and nodded approvingly, saying it looked much better and like a real business forecast. He told me I'd done a good job. I submitted the fake forecast and forgot about it until the end of the year when the actual sales numbers came in. Our real sales matched my original flat forecast almost exactly. All those artificial peaks and valleys my manager insisted on were completely wrong. I was talking to one of the guys from manufacturing about the forecast process. He told me they don't really use those marketing forecasts. When I asked why not, he explained that they'd been making these products for 15 years and knew exactly how much they sell each month. It never changes much. I asked what they do with the forecasts. He said they file them away and build what they know they need to build. Marketing folks don't understand manufacturing data anyway. I started laughing and couldn't stop. My manager had forced me to create fake seasonal patterns because he thought he knew better than the actual data. Then manufacturing ignored the whole thing because they knew the real numbers. The next year when forecast time rolled around, my manager asked for the same seasonal cycling. I gave him another randomly generated forecast that looked exactly like what he expected. He praised it as excellent work. Meanwhile, I kept my real flat forecast in a separate file and tracked it against actual sales throughout the year. Month after month, my original data-based forecast was spot on, while the fake seasonal one was completely wrong. I never told my manager that his beloved cycles were computer-generated random numbers. He spent the rest of my time at that company bragging to other departments about how professional our forecasting process was. The manufacturing team kept ignoring the forecasts and building what they knew they needed to build. Sales stayed flat year-round just like the data showed. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.